The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening when David pulled his black Tesla into the small parking lot. He wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't his usual route home from the office, but traffic on the main highway was completely blocked because of an accident. His GPS had guided him through these back roads he'd never seen before. The charging station was right next to an old diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The neon sign flickered, spelling out Betty's Diner in faded blue letters. David sighed and checked his phone. The charging would take at least 30 minutes. He was already running late for a video call with investors in Tokyo, but there was nothing he could do about it now. At 34 years old, David had built one of the most successful tech companies in the world. His artificial intelligence software was used by millions of people every day. Just last month, Forbes had put him on their cover with the headline, "The Billionaire Next Door." But right now, sitting in this empty parking lot, he felt frustrated and impatient like anyone else stuck in bad weather. He grabbed his laptop bag and ran through the rain to the diner's front door. A small bell chimed as he stepped inside and the warm air hit his face. The place smelled like coffee and fried food. There were maybe 8 tables with red vinyl booths and a long counter with spinning stools. Only 2 other customers were there, an elderly man reading a newspaper and a truck driver eating pie. David chose a corner booth where he could set up his laptop and have some privacy for his call. The Wi-Fi password was written on a small card on the table next to bottles of ketchup and hot sauce. He was pulling out his computer when he heard a voice that made him freeze. "Good evening, honey. What can I get you to drink tonight?" He looked up slowly and his heart nearly stopped. Standing next to his table was Mrs. Patterson, his 3rd-grade teacher from Wilson Elementary School. But she looked so different from how he remembered her. Her hair, which used to be a beautiful auburn color, was now gray and pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a pink uniform with Betty's Diner written on the pocket, and her face looked tired in a way that made David's chest hurt. She was holding a notepad and pen, waiting for his answer with a professional smile. But there was something in her eyes that wasn't there before. A kind of sadness that came from years of hard work and worry. "I'll just have coffee, please," David managed to say, his voice coming out quieter than usual. "Sure thing, sweetie. Cream and sugar?" "Just black, thank you." She nodded and started to walk away, but then she turned back. "Are you sure that's all? We've got fresh apple pie, and the meatloaf special is really good tonight." David shook his head. "The coffee is fine." As she walked toward the kitchen, David couldn't take his eyes off her. This was the woman who had changed his entire life, though she probably didn't even remember him. He had been 8 years old, small for his age, with thick glasses and clothes that never quite fit right. His parents both worked 2 jobs just to pay rent, so he spent most afternoons alone. But Mrs. Patterson had noticed him. She saw that he finished his work faster than the other kids, that he loved reading, that he was good with numbers. She started giving him extra books to take home, harder math problems to solve, and most importantly, she told him something no adult had ever told him before. "You're special, David," she had said one afternoon when he was helping her clean the classroom. "You're going to do amazing things someday. I can see it in you." He was just a poor kid from the wrong side of town, but she made him believe he could be more. She spent her own money to buy him books about computers and science. When the other kids made fun of his second-hand clothes, she would find reasons to keep him busy helping her so he wouldn't feel left out during recess. Now, 26 years later, he was worth over $2 billion. He had houses in 3 different countries, a private jet, and more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. And here was Mrs. Patterson, the woman who made it all possible, working as a waitress in a rundown diner. She came back with his coffee, and her hands shook slightly as she set down the cup. David noticed that her shoes were old and worn, with small holes near the toes. Her uniform had been washed so many times that the pink color had faded to almost white in some places. "There you go," she said with that same warm smile she used to give her students. "Let me know if you need anything else." "Thank you," David said, still staring at her face, hoping she might recognize him. But she didn't. To her, he was just another customer in an expensive suit, probably some businessman, passing through town. She had no idea that the little boy she had encouraged and believed in was sitting right in front of her. As she walked away to check on the other customers, David watched her move around the diner. She refilled the truck driver's coffee without being asked, chatted with the elderly man about his grandchildren, and wiped down tables that were already clean. Even here, even in this job that was so far below what she deserved, she treated everyone with kindness and care. David's laptop sat unopened on the table. The important call with the investors was starting in 10 minutes, but he couldn't focus on anything except Mrs. Patterson. How had this happened? How had someone who had dedicated her life to helping children ended up working in a diner at her age? He pulled out his phone and quickly searched for Wilson Elementary School. The website showed that the school was still there, but when he looked up Mrs. Patterson's name, he found a brief article from 3 years ago in the local newspaper. Budget cuts force beloved teacher into early retirement, the headline read. David's hands were shaking as he read the short article. It talked about how Mrs. Patterson had taught at Wilson Elementary for 35 years, how she was known for helping struggling students, and how she had to retire early when the school district ran out of money. The article mentioned that she had been hoping to teach for a few more years but understood the district's financial problems. His phone buzzed with a notification about his video call, but David ignored it. This was more important than any business meeting. He looked around the diner again, really seeing it this time. The cracked vinyl seats, the flickering lights, the old cash register that looked like it was held together with tape. This wasn't just any diner. This was where his childhood hero was spending her golden years, serving coffee to strangers for tips. Mrs. Patterson walked past his table again, carrying a tray of food to another customer. She moved slowly like her back was hurting, but she never complained or showed any sign of unhappiness. She was still the same caring person she had always been, even though life had not been kind to her. David made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He closed his laptop, canceled his video call, and decided that some things were more important than money, meetings, and business deals. The little boy inside him who had looked up to Mrs. Patterson all those years ago was not going to let her struggle alone anymore. David couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mrs. Patterson's tired face and those worn-out shoes with holes in them. He kept thinking about how she used to stay after school to help him with his reading, how she would pack extra snacks in case he was hungry, how she always made him feel like he mattered. By 6 a.m, he was already at his office, but instead of working on his usual business deals, he was making a very different kind of phone call. Hello, this is David Chen from Chen Technologies. I need to hire a private investigator for a personal matter. It's completely confidential, and money is no object. The investigator he hired was a woman named Jennifer who specialized in background research. She had worked with several celebrities and wealthy business people before, so she understood the need for privacy. David gave her all the information he could remember about Mrs. Patterson, her full name, where she used to teach, and the name of the diner where she now worked. I just want to know how she's doing, David explained during their meeting. What happened to her after she stopped teaching, where she lives, if she has family? I need to understand her situation completely. Jennifer nodded professionally. I'll have a full report for you within 48 hours. Those 2 days felt like the longest of David's life. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering back to that diner. He found himself looking up articles about teacher salaries and retirement benefits, and what he learned made his stomach turn. Teachers in most states barely made enough money to live comfortably while working, and their retirement benefits were often not enough to cover basic expenses. When Jennifer called to set up a meeting to discuss her findings, David could tell from her voice that the news wasn't good. They met at a quiet coffee shop downtown, away from David's office where employees might overhear. Jennifer spread several documents across their table and took a deep breath before she started talking. Her full name is Helen Patterson, she began. She's 67 years old and she taught at Wilson Elementary School for 35 years. She was forced into early retirement 3 years ago when the school district had to cut their budget. David listened carefully, his hands gripped tightly around his coffee cup. Her pension is very small, Jennifer continued. After 35 years of teaching, she gets about $800 a month. From her retirement. That's not enough to live on, especially with today's prices. $800 a month. David spent more than that on coffee for his office. He made that much money in about 2 minutes. What about her family? He asked. Jennifer's expression got even more serious. Her husband died 4 years ago. Cancer. The medical bills were enormous, even with insurance. She had to sell their house to pay the hospital and still owes about $40,000 in medical debt. David felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Mrs. Patterson had been married to Robert, a kind man who used to help coach the school's baseball team. David remembered him from school events, always smiling and cheering for the kids. She has one daughter who lives in Oregon with her own family, Jennifer went on. The daughter has 3 young children and her husband lost his job last year, so they can't help financially. Mrs. Patterson doesn't want to be a burden on them anyway. This was getting worse and worse. David had imagined that maybe Mrs. Patterson was just working part-time to stay busy, that maybe she had a comfortable retirement and just enjoyed being around people, but the reality was heartbreaking. Where does she live now? David asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. She rents a small 1-bedroom apartment on Maple Street. It's not in the best neighborhood, but it's what she can afford. The rent is $600 a month, which doesn't leave much for food and other expenses after her pension. Jennifer pulled out some photos she had taken. David saw a rundown apartment building with peeling paint and broken steps. This was where his childhood hero lived. She works at the diner 5 days a week from 2 in the afternoon until 10 at night, Jennifer continued. She also has a second job cleaning office buildings 3 nights a week, from 11 at night until 4 in the morning. David's heart broke completely. Mrs. Patterson was working almost 70 hours a week at the age of 67, just to survive. She was cleaning offices in the middle of the night, probably with her back aching and her feet hurting just to pay her bills. There's something else, Jennifer said softly. Something that might interest you. She handed David a receipt that she had somehow obtained. It was from a local dollar store, and it showed purchases of notebooks, pencils, erasers, and other school supplies. She buys these every month with her tip money from the diner, Jennifer explained. I talked to some people at Wilson Elementary, and they said she still shows up regularly to drop off supplies for kids whose families can't afford them. The teachers there told me she never stopped caring about her students, even after she had to retire. David stared at the receipt, his eyes filling with tears. Even now, when she barely had enough money to feed herself, Mrs. Patterson was still spending her hard-earned tips to help children she didn't even teach anymore. The teachers at the school told me stories about her, Jennifer continued. How she used to spend her own money on books for students, how she would wash kids' clothes if they came to school dirty, how she would pack extra lunches for children who didn't have enough food at home. They said she probably spent thousands of dollars of her own money over the years helping students. David thought about all the books Mrs. Patterson had bought for him when he was 8 years old. Books about computers and science that had sparked his interest in technology. Books that had literally changed the direction of his entire life. She had been doing the same thing for other kids for decades. What about her health? David asked. Jennifer's face showed concern. She doesn't have good health insurance anymore since she's not a full-time teacher. She goes to the free clinic downtown when she gets sick, and I heard from one of her coworkers at the diner that she's been having problems with her back and her knees. All those years of standing in classrooms, and now standing in the diner, and cleaning buildings have taken a toll. David closed his eyes and tried to control his emotions. The woman who had given him everything was now working herself into the ground just to survive. She was in pain, struggling to pay bills and still finding ways to help others. Is there anything else? He asked. Jennifer nodded. I talked to several of her former students. She taught hundreds of kids over the years, and many of them have gone on to do amazing things. There's a doctor who credits Mrs. Patterson with encouraging her love of science, a published author who says she helped him overcome his reading problems, an engineer who says she was the first person to tell him he was smart. David wasn't surprised. Mrs. Patterson had a gift for seeing potential in children that others missed. She had certainly seen it in him when no one else did. All of these successful people have no idea that their former teacher is struggling, Jennifer concluded. They've moved on with their lives and probably assume she's enjoying a comfortable retirement. David thanked Jennifer for her thorough work and paid her fee, but his mind was already racing with plans. This situation was unacceptable. The woman who had shaped so many lives, who had given so much of herself to help others, deserved so much better than this. David sat in his office for hours after meeting with the investigator, staring at the city lights below. His first instinct was to write a check, a big one that would solve all of Mrs. Patterson's problems immediately. He could pay off her medical debt, buy her a nice house, and give her enough money to live comfortably for the rest of her life. But something stopped him. He remembered how proud Mrs. Patterson had always been, how she never wanted charity, only the chance to help others. If he just showed up and handed her $1 million, she would probably refuse it. Worse, it might embarrass her or make her feel like a charity case. No, this had to be done differently. It had to be done in a way that gave her dignity, purpose, and the recognition she deserved. David called his lawyer the next morning. Tom Rodriguez had been handling David's business deals for years and was used to unusual requests. But this one was different. "I want to buy a small diner," David said over the phone. "A diner? David, you're worth billions. Why do you want to buy a diner? It's called Betty's Diner on Route 47. I want you to handle the purchase quietly through shell companies so no one knows I'm involved. Make the current owner an offer he can't refuse." Tom was quiet for a moment. "Okay, but what's your plan for it?" David had been thinking about this all night. "I want to turn it into something special. A community learning center that also serves food. A place where kids can come for tutoring, where adults can take classes, where families can have affordable meals, and I want to create a very specific job there, Director of Community Learning." Within a week, Tom had purchased Betty's Diner for twice what it was worth. The previous owner, who had been struggling to keep the business running, was thrilled to sell. But David's plan was just getting started. While his lawyers were handling the paperwork, David started working on the second part of his plan. He spent days searching through social media, school records, and alumni databases, looking for other students that Mrs. Patterson had taught over the years. The search was harder than he expected. Mrs. Patterson had taught for 35 years, which meant hundreds of students. Many of them had married and changed their names, moved to different cities, or simply weren't active on social media. But David was determined, and he had resources that most people didn't have. He hired a team of researchers to help him track down former students. They started with Wilson Elementary School's old yearbooks and class photos, then used professional databases to find current addresses and contact information. The first person they found was Dr. Lisa Chang, who was now a pediatric heart surgeon at a children's hospital in Chicago. When David called her and mentioned Mrs. Patterson's name, she immediately started crying. "Oh my goodness, Mrs. Patterson," Lisa said through her tears. "She changed my entire life. I was this shy little girl who was terrible at math and science, but she saw something in me. She stayed after school 3 days a week for an entire year to help me with my homework. She's the reason I became a doctor." David explained his plan, and Lisa was immediately on board. "Whatever you need from me, I'm in. That woman deserves the world." The next person was Michael Torres, a successful architect living in Denver. His reaction was similar to Lisa's. "Mrs. Patterson was the first person who ever told me I was creative," Michael said. "I was failing art class because I couldn't draw the way the teacher wanted, but Mrs. Patterson saw that I was good at building things with blocks and suggested I might like architecture. She even brought me books about famous buildings from the UR library." One by one, David's team found more former students. There was Rebecca Kim, who now owned a chain of successful restaurants. She credited Mrs. Patterson with teaching her that hard work and kindness were the most important ingredients in any recipe for success. They found James Wilson, a published author of children's books, who said Mrs. Patterson was the first person to encourage his love of storytelling. She had created a special writing corner in her classroom just for him. There was Carlos Martinez, now a high school principal, who remembered how Mrs. Patterson had defended him when other teachers wanted to put him in special education classes. She knew he wasn't slow. He just needed someone to believe in him. Each phone call was the same. The moment David mentioned Mrs. Patterson's name, these successful adults would start sharing memories of how she had changed their lives. And when he told them about her current situation, they were all heartbroken and eager to help. But David still wasn't ready to reveal his plan to Mrs. Patterson. First, he needed to make sure everything was perfect. He hired a team of designers and contractors to renovate the old diner. They worked at night so Mrs. Patterson wouldn't see the changes during her shifts. The transformation was incredible. They kept the warm, welcoming feeling of the original diner, but added a library area with comfortable reading chairs, several rooms for tutoring and classes, and a community bulletin board where local families could find resources and support. The kitchen was completely modernized but designed to serve both restaurant customers and provide cooking classes for families who wanted to learn how to prepare healthy, affordable meals. There was even a small playground outside for children to use while their parents attended classes or meetings. David created a job description for the Director of Community Learning position that seemed like it was written specifically for Mrs. Patterson, because it was. The job involved mentoring at-risk children, coordinating educational programs, connecting families with community resources, and providing the kind of caring, personal attention that had made her such an exceptional teacher. The salary was $85,000 a year, plus full health benefits and a retirement plan. It was more than many teachers made even after decades of experience, and it would give Mrs. Patterson the financial security and respect she deserved. But David wanted to do more than just offer her a job. He wanted to show her how much she had, mattered to all the lives she had touched. He organized a secret reunion of her former students. Lisa flew in from Chicago. Michael came from Denver. Rebecca closed her restaurant for the day to be there. James rearranged his book tour schedule. Carlos took a personal day from his principal duties. In total, 43 of Mrs. Patterson's former students agreed to participate in the surprise. They came from 12 different states, representing every decade of her teaching career. There were doctors, lawyers, teachers, artists, business owners, and parents, all successful adults who credited Mrs. Patterson with helping them become who they were. Each one brought a letter telling their personal story of how she had impacted their life, and many brought donations for a special fund that David had established. Even though David could have funded everything himself, he wanted Mrs. Patterson's former students to be part of giving back to the woman who had given them so much. The fund grew quickly. Some people contributed $50, others gave thousands, but every donation came with the same message: gratitude for a teacher who had seen their potential when no one else did. David also reached out to the local media, but carefully. He didn't want this to be about him or his wealth. He wanted it to be about Mrs. Patterson and the importance of recognizing the teachers who shape our children's lives. Everything was finally in place. The diner had been transformed into the Helen Patterson Community Learning Center. Her former students were ready to surprise her. The job offer was prepared. The fund had grown to over $500,000. But David was nervous. What if she said no? What if she was too proud to accept help? What if seeing all these successful former students made her feel bad about her current situation? He pushed those worries aside. Mrs. Patterson had taught him to be brave, to take chances, to believe that good things were possible. Now it was time to show her that the little boy she had believed in had grown up to be someone who would never forget her kindness. Tuesday morning started like any other day for Mrs. Patterson. Her alarm went off at 11 a.m. after only 5 hours of sleep. She had worked at the office cleaning job until 4 a.m., came home, showered, and tried to rest before her afternoon shift at the diner. Her back was aching more than usual as she got dressed in her pink uniform. The doctor at the free clinic had told her she needed to take it easy, but she couldn't afford to miss work. The rent was due next week, and she was still $20 short. She made herself a small breakfast, just toast and coffee, and looked at the bills spread across her tiny kitchen table. The electricity bill had gone up again, and she would have to choose between buying her blood pressure medication or getting her car fixed. The old Honda was making a strange noise, but she needed it to get to work. At 1:45 p.m., Mrs. Patterson grabbed her purse and keys, took a deep breath, and headed out the door. She had no idea that this would be the most important day of her life. When she pulled into the diner's parking lot, she immediately noticed something was different. There were way more cars than usual for a Tuesday afternoon. The parking lot was completely full, and she had to park across the street. Must be a bus tour or something, she thought to herself as she hurried toward the front door. Betty always got stressed when they had large groups without warning. But when Mrs. Patterson opened the door, she froze. The entire diner had been decorated with colorful banners and balloons. Every single table was full of people, and they were all looking at her with huge smiles on their faces. Surprise! Everyone shouted at once. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her chest, and she felt like she might faint. She recognized some of the faces, but they looked older, more mature. It took her brain a few seconds to process what she was seeing. Mrs. Patterson called out a woman with long black hair who was sitting at the corner table. "It's me, Lisa. Lisa Chang from your 1995 class." Mrs. Patterson's eyes grew wide. Little Lisa Chang, the shy girl who used to struggle with math, was now a grown woman, in a doctor's coat. "Lisa?" Mrs. Patterson whispered, tears already starting to form in her eyes. "And me," called out a tall man with a beard. "Michael Torres. You used to help me build towers with blocks during recess." "Rebecca Kim," said a woman near the counter. "You taught me that being different was okay." One by one, her former students started introducing themselves. Mrs. Patterson moved slowly through the diner, her hands shaking, trying to match the adult faces with the children she remembered. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "How did you all? Why are you here?" That's when David stepped forward from the back of the room. He'd been watching from a distance, his own eyes filled with tears as he saw his former teacher's reaction. "Hello, Mrs. Patterson," he said quietly. "You probably don't remember me. I'm David Chen. I was in your third grade class in 1999. Mrs. Patterson looked at him carefully, and slowly, recognition dawned on her face. "David? Little David with the thick glasses who loved to read?" "That's me," David said, his voice cracking with emotion. "The boy who used to stay after school because his parents worked late, the one you bought books for with your own money." Mrs. Patterson covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed by the flood of memories. "You told me I was smart," David continued, stepping closer. "You said I could change the world someday. Do you remember that?" She nodded, tears now streaming down her face. "Well," David said, gesturing around the room, "you were right, but not in the way you think. You see, I did become successful. I built a technology company and I made a lot of money. But the most important thing I ever did was learn from you how to see potential in people, how to believe in others, how to use whatever gifts you have to help make the world better." Mrs. Patterson was crying so hard she could barely speak. "David, I don't understand why you're all here." Lisa stood up from her table. "Mrs. Patterson, you changed all of our lives. I'm a heart surgeon now and I save children's lives every day. But I never would have made it through medical school if you hadn't taught me that I was smart enough to do anything." Michael nodded. "You saw that I was creative when no one else did. I'm an architect now, designing buildings that will stand for hundreds of years. But it all started with those blocks in your classroom." Rebecca wiped her own tears. "You taught me that hard work and kindness were more important than anything else. I own 5 restaurants now, and I make sure every employee feels valued, just like you made every student feel special." One by one, her former students shared their stories. There was James, the published author, who remembered how she had encouraged his love of writing. Carlos, now a school principal, who credited her with believing in him when other teachers had given up. Patricia, a social worker who said Mrs. Patterson had taught her the importance of helping others. Each story was the same: a successful adult whose life had been shaped by a teacher who saw their potential and refused to give up on them. Mrs. Patterson sank into a nearby chair, overwhelmed by the love filling the room. "I just did my job," she whispered. "I just tried to help you learn." "No," David said firmly. "You did so much more than that. You gave us confidence. You made us believe in ourselves. You spent your own money to help us. You stayed late to tutor us. You saw something special in each of us when we couldn't see it ourselves. He knelt down next to her chair. Mrs. Patterson, 3 weeks ago I was driving through town and stopped at this diner. When I saw you working here, my heart broke. I found out about your husband, about the medical bills, about how you're working 2 jobs just to survive. Mrs. Patterson looked embarrassed. David, you don't need to worry about me. I'm doing fine. No, you're not, he said gently. And you shouldn't have to. The woman who gave so much to so many children deserves better than this. David stood up and gestured toward the front of the diner, where a large banner was hanging. Mrs. Patterson, I bought this diner, but I didn't buy it to run a restaurant. I bought it to create something new, the Helen Patterson Community Learning Center. Mrs. Patterson gasped and looked around with new eyes. For the first time, she noticed that the diner looked completely different. There were bookshelves along the walls, comfortable chairs for reading, and what looked like classroom spaces in the back. I want to offer you a job, David continued. Director of Community Learning. You would work with at-risk children, coordinate educational programs, and do what you've always done best. See potential in kids that others miss. The salary is $85,000 a year, plus full health benefits and a retirement plan that will let you live comfortably for the rest of your life. Mrs. Patterson couldn't speak. She looked around the room at all the faces of her former students, all successful adults who had traveled from across the country just to honor her. But wait, David said with a smile. There's more. Lisa stood up again. Mrs. Patterson, we all contributed to a special fund. We wanted to give back to the woman who gave us so much. Michael held up an envelope. This fund will pay off all your medical debt and give you a fresh start. The total is $543,000, Rebecca announced. Every dollar given with love and gratitude. Mrs. Patterson put her head in her hands and sobbed. These children she had taught, these adults she had helped shape, had come together to take care of her in her time of need. I don't deserve this, she cried. Yes, you do. Every voice in the room said at the same time. David knelt down again and took her hands. Mrs. Patterson, you told a scared little boy that he could change the world. Well, today, that little boy wants to change yours. 6 months later, Mrs. Patterson woke up in her new apartment at 7 a.m. feeling rested for the first time in years. She had slept for 8 full hours without worrying about bills or working multiple jobs. The morning sun was streaming through, clean windows, and she could hear children playing in the park across the street. Her new home was simple but comfortable, a 2-bedroom apartment that David had helped her find in a safe neighborhood. She had her own bedroom, a small office for planning her work at the learning center, and a kitchen where she could actually cook healthy meals instead of surviving on cheap fast food. After a leisurely breakfast and her morning coffee, Mrs. Patterson got dressed for work. But this wasn't the tired, painful routine of putting on a faded diner uniform. Instead, she put on comfortable clothes suitable for working with children, a soft sweater, comfortable pants, and new shoes that didn't hurt her feet. At 8:30 a.m., she drove to the Helen Patterson Community Learning Center in the reliable Honda that David had insisted on having completely repaired. The parking lot was already full of cars. Parents dropping off children for the before-school tutoring program, adults arriving for GED classes, and volunteers coming to help with various programs. The transformation of the old diner still amazed her every day. The main dining area had become a welcoming space with round tables where families could eat affordable meals together. But now there were also cozy reading nooks with soft chairs and good lighting, computer stations where adults could learn new skills, and a children's area with educational games and books. "Good morning, Mrs. Patterson," called out Tommy, an 8-year-old boy who reminded her so much of David at that age. Tommy came from a single-parent home and struggled with reading, but Mrs. Patterson had been working with him every day for 3 months. "Good morning, sweetheart," she replied with a genuine smile. "Are you ready to read our new book today?" Tommy nodded excitedly. 3 months ago, he could barely read simple sentences, Now he was working through chapter books and loving every page. Mrs. Patterson's official title was Director of Community Learning, but everyone just called her Teacher. She worked with at-risk children who needed extra help, coordinated programs for families, and connected people with resources they needed. But most importantly, she did what she had always done best. She saw potential in every person who walked through the door. The Learning Center had become the heart of the community. In the morning, there were programs for preschoolers and tutoring for school-aged children. During lunch, they served affordable, healthy meals for families who were struggling financially. In the afternoon, there were after-school programs where children could get help with homework while their parents attended adult education classes. Evenings brought cooking classes where families learned to prepare nutritious meals on a budget, job training workshops, and support groups for parents. Weekends featured family events, community meetings, and special programs like science fairs and art exhibitions. The local newspaper had written several articles about the center, and the story had spread beyond their small town. Mrs. Patterson found herself being interviewed by reporters from big newspapers and television stations who wanted to know about this amazing transformation. But the media attention had brought an unexpected result. The story of David finding his former teacher and creating the Learning Center had gone viral on social media. People across the country started sharing their own memories of teachers who had made a difference in their lives. A hashtag called Remember Your Teacher began trending, and suddenly successful people everywhere were trying to track down educators who had believed in them when they were young. Some found their former teachers living comfortably in retirement, but many discovered situations similar to what Mrs. Patterson had been going through. Dr. Lisa Chang, who had flown in for the surprise reunion 6 months earlier, started a foundation to help retired teachers who were struggling financially. Within 3 months, they had raised over $2 million and were helping dozens of former educators across the country. Michael Torres, the architect, began designing learning centers similar to Mrs. Patterson's in other cities. He worked with local business leaders to create community spaces where education, nutrition, and family support could come together. Rebecca Kim started a program in her restaurants where former teachers could eat free meals, and she hired several retired educators to work part-time positions with flexible schedules and good benefits. The ripple effect was spreading faster than anyone had imagined. Teachers who were still working in schools began receiving surprise visits from former students who wanted to thank them and offer support. School districts started receiving anonymous donations to improve teacher salaries and classroom resources. David himself had been transformed by the experience. He spent at least 1 day a week at the Learning Center, not as the wealthy benefactor, but as a volunteer tutor and mentor. Working with the children reminded him why he had fallen in love with learning in the first place. He had also redirected a significant portion of his business toward educational technology. His company was now developing free learning software for schools and creating programs to help train new teachers. He established a fund that provided micro-grants to teachers who wanted to buy supplies or create special programs for their students. But the most important change was in his relationship with Mrs. Patterson. She had become like a grandmother to him, someone he called when he needed advice or just wanted to talk. Every Sunday he had dinner at her apartment, and she would tell him stories about the children at the center and ask about his work and personal life. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said to him one Sunday evening as they sat on her small balcony, watching the sunset, "I never thought I'd say this, but losing my teaching job was the best thing that ever happened to me." David looked surprised. "Really? But you loved teaching at the elementary school?" "I did love it," she agreed. "But I was limited by the system. I had to follow strict curriculums, deal with endless paperwork, and I never had enough time or resources to really help the children who needed it most." She gestured toward the Learning Center visible from her balcony. "Here, I can work with each child as long as they need. I can help entire families, not just individual students. I can see kids grow and change in ways that weren't possible in a traditional classroom." Mrs. Patterson paused and looked at David with the same proud expression she used to give him when he solved a difficult math problem in 3rd grade. "And most importantly," she continued, "I get to watch my former students change the world. Lisa is saving children's lives. Michael is designing buildings that will inspire future generations. Rebecca is creating jobs and feeding families. And you, sweet David, you're showing people that success means nothing if you don't use it to help others. David felt tears in his eyes. I learned that from you, you know. No, Mrs. Patterson said firmly. You learned it from watching what happened. When someone believed in you, now you're passing that gift along to others. As the sun set over their small town, Mrs. Patterson and David sat quietly together, teacher and student, both grateful for the day their paths had crossed again. The learning center was filled with laughter and learning. Dozens of former students were making a